All right, all right. So, what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is September 25th, 2024, about 8:30 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing the long tread, the long walk to freedom by reading Kamala Harris's memoir, her 2019 book, The Truths We Hold. In our last live stream, we started again on chapter 1 and went through Kamala's early life, growing up in her household with her short Indian mother who was tough as nails, who only wanted to cure breast cancer and make sure her two Black daughters got the most radical Black education they could, go into a Black daycare center and all of that sort of stuff. It was a kind of an interesting read. We're going to finish up chapter 1 today and try to read as much as we can. Once again, I'm trying to go live as much as possible and also continue to upload on my channel, but I'm hella busy with English classes, very busy with my studies at school, finding it very hard to find time to sleep and also do my writing for culturalist theory as well. I'm overworked. I got 30 things to do with only 20 minutes of time. So yeah, we're just trying to make the best with what we have and just keep it pushing that way. I think I have some allergies popping off, so might be sneezing a bit during this live stream. Okay. But I got to say this. If you like my content, if you like the education that we're providing on this channel, the conversations that we're having, the things that we're learning about, you can donate to the Put a Young Black Man Through the White Man's Technology Education System by donating to this channel in the PayPal link or through the Super Chats, whatever you want to do. Anyway, let's continue here. And yeah, basically, we're going to this part after Kamala, grew up in the Bay Area. Her mama moved them to Montreal. She stayed there for a few years. She never learned French. She just took some, classes there and then came back to the States. And now she's going to university because she wants to be a lawyer because somebody in her neighborhood was a lawyer. And that person was a big inspiration for her. All right. Once again, might be sneezing a lot. I apologize to anybody who's listening. Like, this is gross. Okay. Y'all let me know how the new mic sounds, how the camera looks, and everything like that. I'm still adjusting to the settings. You know, I'm not the big tech guy. But anyway, let's read through this book. Let's go. So I had always heard stories about what a wonderful place Howard University was, especially from Aunt Chris, who had gone there. Howard is an institution with an extraordinary legacy, one that has endured and thrived since its founding. 2 years after the Civil War, it endured when the doors of higher education were largely closed to Black students. It endured when segregation and discrimination were the law of the land. It endured when few recognized the potential and capacity of young Black men and women to be leaders. Generations of students had been nurtured and edified at Howard, equipped with the confidence to aim high and the tools to make the climb. I wanted to be one of them. And in the fall of 1982, I moved into Eton Towers, my first college dorm. I'll always remember walking into Crampton Auditorium for my freshman orientation. The room was packed. I stood in the back, looked around and thought, this is heaven. There were hundreds of people and everyone looked like me. Some were children of Howard alumni. Others were the first in their families to go to college. Some had been in predominantly Black schools their whole lives. Others had been one of a few people of color in their classroom or their neighborhood. Some came from cities, some from rural communities, and some from African countries, the Caribbean, and throughout the African diaspora. I got to say this. I went to a PWI, Loyola University, and I don't regret going to a PWI. I don't think my life would be that different had I went to a HBCU. I do think there is great value in going to a HBCU, especially if you're like a Black person who grew up in an area where you didn't have other Black people around you, especially if you were, that one Black face in the classroom, right? And that was your whole experience. If your parents unfortunately made you live out in the suburbs somewhere, in the vastland, in the wastelands of the Caucasians, right? You had to live amongst them. But I would say this. I think going to a HBCU is a great thing. I think it might be interesting seeing how a HBCU grad could be the first president, right, and how that could bring more esteem and more recognition to HBCUs in America, having an alumni become president, right? More support needs to be given to these schools. Some HBCUs have closed. There needs to be a better fostering education in general in America, but especially for HBCUs, right? That's all I got to say about that. Continuing here, as was the case for most Howard students, my favorite place to hang out was an area we called the Yard, a grass-covered space the size of a city block, right smack in the heart of the campus. On any given day, you could stand in the middle of the yard and see, on your right, young dancers practicing their steps or musicians playing instruments. Look to your left, and there was a briefcase toting students. There were briefcase toting students strolling out of business class and medical students in their white coats heading back to the lab. Groups of students might be in a circle of laughter or locked in deep conversation. A columnist for the Hilltop, the school newspaper, with the star of the football team. A gospel choir singer with the president of the math club. Sounds cool. Sounds diverse. Sounds interesting. You know, my PWI experience was in the deep South, right? So even though I went to Loyola University, which is still hella white, there were a lot of black students in my freshman class, right? So it was easy for me to make like black friends and also click up with black people who came from different parts of the country, right? I'll never forget, I met a black person from Minnesota. First thing I said was, I didn't even know we had niggas up there. I got to meet some people from LA from the first time, people from the Bay, people from New York, you know what I mean? People from Atlanta, you know what I mean? So my PWI experience, I feel like, was still very black, and I was surrounded by a lot of like black genius around me. Unfortunately, a lot of the black people that I went to school with didn't make it all the way. In fact, if I keep it a buck, only about 3 of my black male friends, I'm not talking about the black females, only 3 of my black male friends were with me from freshman year all the way to senior year, if I remember right. And the other people that came after me, like the class after 2010, because I was in the class of like opening 2009 freshman class, right? A lot of the black dudes there finished, I think, but it's hard as hell to continue at a PWI private school far away from home. So I'm not faulting the brothers for not making it all the way. But anyway, continuing here. So that was the beauty of Howard. Every signal told students that we could be anything, that we were young, gifted, and black, and we shouldn't let anything get in the way of our success. The campus was a place where you didn't have to be confined to the box of another person's choosing. At Howard, you could come as you were and leave as the person you aspired to be. There were no false choices. All right, just checking on the camera, stuff like that, making sure it looks good. Okay. All right. Yeah, continuing here. We weren't just told we had the capacity to be great. We were challenged to live up to that potential. There was an expectation that we would cultivate and use our talents to take on roles of leadership and have an impact on other people, on our country, and maybe even on the world. I dove in with gusto freshman year. I ran for my first elected office, freshman class representative of the Liberal Arts Student Council. It was my very first campaign. No opponent I faced since was as tough as Jersey girl Shelley Young, and that says a lot coming from a person from Oakland. Okay, it's good to see she's been debating for a while. That's why she smoked Trump. That's why she smoked Trump at that debate. I chaired the Economic Society and competed on the debate team. I pledged a sorority, my beloved Alpha Kappa Alpha, founded by 9 women at Howard more than a century ago. On Fridays, my friends and I would dress up in our best clothes and peacock around the yard. On weekends, we went down to the National Mall to protest apartheid in South Africa. While at Howard, in addition to being a student, I had many jobs. I interned at the Federal Trade Commission, where I was responsible for clips, which meant combing all the morning newspapers, cutting out any articles that mentioned the agency, and pasting them onto sheets of paper to copy and distribute to senior staff. I also did research in the National Archives and was on tour and was a tour guide at the U.S. Bureau of Engraving and Printing. My fellow tour guides and I were all given walkie-talkies and ID numbers. I was TG10, a code name that made me feel like a Secret Service agent. Once I emerged from my shift to find Ruby D and Ossie Davis in the main area, waiting for a VIP tour after hours. They projected an aura like the luminaries they were, yet they made a special point of engaging me in conversation and telling me that it made them proud to see me as a young Black woman working in public service. I've never forgotten how it made me feel as a young person to have these 2 icons, both larger than life, take the time to show an interest in me. Once again, I think it's so crazy, like how, people honestly don't read. People say, like, Kamala has never said she's Black. This woman talk about being Black more than Simon Hill keeps it trill. If Simon Hill kept it trill, wrote a book about my life, I wouldn't use Black, Black, Black this much in every damn paragraph. You get what I'm saying? Like, Out of all the gripes we can have about Kamala, about being a neoliberal shill, flip-flopping, supporting the Zionist genocide in Palestine, blah, 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 not really being as progressive as probably her heart really wants her to be. You get what I'm saying? Like, the one thing you cannot say is that this girl is not black, because she's had a black ass life, a really black ass life. Continuing here. In the summer of my sophomore year, I got an internship with Senator Alan Cranston of California. Who would have known that some 30 years later, I would be elected to the same Senate seat? I still have framed the thank you letter from his office manager, which hangs in my Senate office near where my own interns sit. When I find myself riding the Senate subway with interns, I often tell them, "You're looking at your future." I loved going to the Capitol building every day that summer for work. It felt like the epicenter of change. And even as an intern sorting mail, I was thrilled to be part of it. But I was even more mesmerized by the Supreme Court building across the street. I would walk across the street in the hot, humid summer when you could cut the air with a butter knife, just so I could stand in awe of its magnificence and read the words engraved in marble above its entrance: equal justice under law. I imagine a world where that might be. After Howard, I returned home to Oakland and enrolled at UC Hastings College of the Law. I was elected president of the Black Law Students Association. Come on now. Come on now. That's hard. That's hard. I was elected president of the Black Law Students Association during my second year in law school. At the time, Black students were having a harder time finding employment than white students, and I wanted to change that. As BLSA president, I called the managing partners of all the major law firms and asked them to send representatives to a job fair we were hosting at a hotel. When I realized that I wanted to work in the district attorney's office, that I had found my calling, I was excited to share the decision with my friends and family. And I wasn't surprised to find them incredulous. I had to defend my choice as one would a thesis. America has a deep and dark history of people using the power of the prosecutor as an instrument of injustice. I'm glad she acknowledges that. I knew this history well, of innocent men framed, of charges brought against people of color without sufficient evidence, of prosecutors hiding information that would exonerate defendants, of the disproportionate application of the law. I grew up with these stories, so I understood my community's wariness. But history told another story too. I knew the history of brave prosecutors who went after the Ku Klux Klan in the South. I knew the stories of prosecutors who went after corrupt politicians and corporate polluters. I knew the legacy of Robert Kennedy, who, as U.S. Attorney General, sent Department of Justice officials to protect the Freedom Riders in 1961 and sent the U.S. Marshals to protect James Meredith when he enrolled at Ole Miss the next year. I knew quite well that equal justice was an aspiration. I knew that the force of the law was applied unevenly, sometimes by design. But I also knew that what was wrong with the system didn't need to be an immutable fact. And I wanted to be part of changing that. One of my mother's favorite sayings was, "Don't let anybody tell you who you are. You tell them who you are." And so I did. I knew part of making change was what I'd seen all my life, surrounded by adults shouting and marching and demanding justice from the outside. But I also knew there was an important role on the inside, sitting at the table where the decisions were being made. When activists came marching and banging on the door, I wanted to be on the other side to let them in. Okay. Let's break down this sort of thinking, right? There are some people that say, the only way we can change policing in America or the way the legal system works is if we get more black faces on the benches with the badges as the prosecutors and that sort of stuff, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure this sentiment also exists in other types of social movements, right? If we want women to be treated fairly, we need more women in power. If we want gay people, right, we need to have gay people and other sorts of people with disparate wants and needs and desires in different areas of activity to make sure that our influence can be heard, right? I think to some degree this can work, but I think by and large what it does is calcify and ossify the system to maintain its hold on power, right? Like, you're going to become a cop, right? To say, I want to do better policing because I'm sick of hearing about white cops beating up on unarmed black motorists or something like that, right? But you're going to have to do the same exact thing. You're going to have to be the black cop who pulls over motorists for broken taillights. You're going to be the one who has to write the tickets. You're going to be the one that has to pull the gun out and shoot somebody, right? It's hard for me to sympathize with this idea that if we have more black faces in high places, that eventually things will get better, or that we can be the activists on the inside. We can be the one holding up the fist on the inside to let the protesters in, right? when that's not the case, right? In a perfect universe, in a universe where justice and rationality reigns, Kamala wouldn't be talking about the pro-Palestinian anti-Zionist movement by saying that the people there are supporting Hamas and stuff like that. Not saying that those are her words exactly, but when she starts lying and saying like Hamas was like raping the people that they captured on October 7th, and they were committing horrendous atrocities, as if Israel killing 50,000 innocent Palestinians is not a horrific tragedy in and of itself, she wouldn't be saying stuff like that. But because she is a part of the system, she has to play the system's game. So where is this radical on the inside? Where is the spook who sat by the door? Right? That's the thing. Nelson Moreno says capitalism will fall when we put broke people in charge of banks. Yeah, that's like the crazy thinking. Like that thinking doesn't make sense. Like saying we'll put broke people in charge of the banks. Okay, you might put somebody in there who might give themselves a high rate salary, but they're going to be trying to maintain the banking system. They're going to try to maintain the banking system so that they can continue to reap benefits from that banking apparatus, right? Like they're not going to try to overhaul and overturn the system, because the system is more powerful than one individual or groups of individuals that try to infiltrate it. There has to be resistance on the outside to force that system to fall, rather than trying to make it fall from the inside. You get what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm going to continue here. I was going to be a prosecutor in my own image. I was going to do the job through the lens of my own experience and perspectives, from wisdom gained at my mother's knee in Rainbow Science Hall and on the Howard Yard. That's like saying, I'm going to be that one teacher that's going to overhaul the system, and I'm going to make sure that, the kids of the next generation don't get taught like the same BS, right? Like, but I'm only one individual. I can't change the way that teaching is done generally throughout America or throughout the world, right? I can do my part, but it's futile to say like becoming a cop or a prosecutor or a judge in a system that's inherently corrupt is going to somehow work its way. Your machinations in it are going to somehow radically change it. I don't think so. All right, I'm continuing here. An important part of what the wisdom told me was that when it came to criminal justice, we were being asked to accept false choices. For too long, we've been told there were only two options: to be either tough on crime or soft on crime, an oversimplification that ignored the realities of public safety. You can want the police to stop crime in your neighborhood and also want them to stop using excessive force. You can want them to hunt down a killer on your streets and also want them to stop using racial profiling. You can believe in the needs for consequence and accountability, especially for serious criminals, and also oppose unjust incarceration. I believed it was essential to weave all these varied strands together. At the end of my summer internship, I was thrilled to accept a position as deputy district attorney. All I had to do was finish my final year of law school and take the bar exam, and then I'd be able to start my career in the courtroom. I finished law school in the spring of 1989 and took the bar exam in July. In the waning weeks of summer, my future seemed so bright and so clear. The countdown to the life I imagined had begun, and then with a jolt, I was stopped in my tracks. In November, the state bar sent letters out to those who had taken the exam, and to my utter devastation, I had failed. I couldn't get my head around it. It was almost too much to bear. My mother had always told me, don't do anything half-assed. She was scared that her mama was going to bring out that stick again and start beating on her, because we read in our last chapter, Kamala got beat every time she studied, played piano, got whacked on her hands, chased around the house by her mother with a rolling pin. You know what I'm saying? Oh, sorry, guys. I think I have allergies. Think I got allergies. Hope I'm not getting sick. Anyway, continue here. All right. I had failed. I couldn't get my head around it. It was almost too much to bear. My mother had always told me, don't do anything half-assed, and I had always taken that to heart. I was a hard worker, a perfectionist, someone who didn't take things for granted. But there I was, letter in hand, realizing that in studying for the bar, I had put forward the most half-assed performance of my life. The bar must be hard, because I believe she probably studied hella hard. You get what I'm saying? I should have been a lawyer. I should have been a lawyer instead of a struggle tuber. Simon Hill, the lawyer. Your Honor, my client is not guilty, and you are a racist, white supremacist prick. And I don't care that you're a fine-ass young black woman. You are supporting a white supremacist system by being the judge, trying to prosecute my client, ma'am. Now let him go and let me have your number. I'm sorry. Fortunately, I still had a job in the district attorney's office. They were going to keep me on with clerk duties and give me space to study to retake the exam in February. I was grateful for that, but it was hard to go into the office feeling inadequate and incompetent. Just about everyone else who had been hired along with me had passed, and they were going to move on with their training without me. I remember walking by someone's office and hearing them say to someone else, "But she's so smart. How could she not have passed?" I felt miserable and embarrassed. I wondered if people thought I was a fraud, but I held up my head and kept going to work every day, and I passed on my second attempt. I was so proud and so honored the day I was sworn in as an officer of the court, and I showed up at the courthouse ready to start the work. But as it turns out, neither law school nor the bar exam really teach you what to do in court. And in those early days, it can feel like you've landed on another planet where everyone speaks the language but you. As a clerk, you can represent the people in court under supervision, but this was the first time I'd be in trial on my own. Nelson Moreno jumped into the chat. He said, "Simon, I bought a VPN so I can create another Reddit and Twitter account. Give me time so I can jump in the next movie review live." Absolutely. You're always welcome to jump in. We're going to be doing the elephant review. If you can hear in the microphone, Acti is in another room doing a class. I got 3 English classes starting at 10 o'clock. So it's hard for us to do the movie reviews, but keep sending suggestions. Keep on sending movies you want us to watch, and we will try to cover them. We'll probably be doing the movie reviews on the weekend, and in between us doing homework, English classes, having sex, stuff like that. You get what I'm saying? Continuing here. All right. Where were we? So yeah, but she starts her job as a clerk of the court. So I had prepared going over the facts of the case a dozen times. I'd practiced the questions I wanted to ask, internalized the precise wording of my legal motions. I'd researched and rehearsed every practice and custom, down to the skirt suit that was de rigueur for female attorneys, back before women were permitted to wear pants in the courtroom. I'd done everything I could. Still, the stakes were so high. It never felt like enough. I walked into the courtroom, down the gallery aisle, and past the pews to the bar that separates defendants, families, witnesses, and other spectators from officials of the court. Chairs were arrayed in front of the bar for lawyers waiting for their cases to be called, and I took my seat among them. Nerves, excitement, and adrenaline jockeyed for position in my mind. But most of all, I was honored by and conscious of the immense responsibility I held, the duty to protect those who were among the most vulnerable and voiceless members of our society. When my turn came, I rose from my chair at the prosecutor's desk and stepped up to the podium, saying the words every prosecutor speaks: Kamala Harris, for the people. The reason we have public offices of prosecution in America is that in our country, a crime against any of us is considered a crime against all of us. Almost by definition, our criminal justice system involves matters in which the powerful have harmed the less powerful, and we do not expect the weaker party to secure justice alone. We make it a collective endeavor. That's why prosecutors don't represent the victim. They represent the people, society at large. I kept that principle front and center as I worked with victims whose dignity and safety were always paramount for me. It takes an enormous amount of courage for someone to share their story and endure cross-examination, knowing their credibility and most personal details may be on the line. But when they take the stand, they are doing so for the benefit of all of us, so that there will be consequences and accountability for those who violate the law. For the people was my compass, and there was nothing I took more serious than the power I now possessed. As an individual prosecutor, I had the discretion to decide whether to bring charges against someone, and if so, what and how many charges to bring. I could negotiate plea agreements and provide sentencing and bail recommendations to the court. I was just starting out as a prosecutor, and yet I had the power to deprive a person of their liberty with the swipe of my pen. When it came time for closing arguments, I approached the jury box. I decided to do it with notes so I wouldn't be looking down at a piece of paper, reading off my best arguments for why they should convict the defendant. I wanted to look the jurors in the eye. I felt that I should know my case well enough that I could close my eyes and see the entire incident in 360 degrees. As I finished my closing and headed back to the prosecutor's table, I caught a glimpse of the audience. Amy Ressner, my friend from the first day of orientation, was sitting there with a big smile on her face, cheering me on. Now we were both on our way. The daily work was intense. At any given time, an individual prosecutor might be juggling more than 100 cases. We started with lower level work, arguing preliminary hearings, doing misdemeanor trials that covered things like DUIs and petty thefts. As the years passed, I got more and more trials under my belt and moved my way up the hierarchy of the office. In time, I would start prosecuting violent felonies, which took the work to a whole new level. I would pore over police reports and interview witnesses. I would sit with the coroner and go through autopsy photographs, always cognizant that I was looking at somebody's child or parent. When police arrested a suspect, I would go down to the police station and stand on the other side of a two-way mirror and pass notes back and forth with investigators conducting the interview. Once I started prosecuting felonies, I was assigned to homicide duty. I'd be given a briefcase on a Friday afternoon containing a pager, high tech for the early 90s, a pen and pad, a copy of the penal code, and a list of critical numbers to call. For the next week, whenever the pager went off, it meant that there had been a homicide and I was needed at the scene. That's how frequently homicides happen in America. That's insane. They were giving prosecutors pagers. I bet that thing was ringing off like crazy in Northern California in the 90s, early 90s. Usually, that meant leaping out of bed between midnight and 6 a.m. My role was to make sure evidence was collected in the proper way with all appropriate constitutional protections intact so that it would be admissible in court. I often had to explain to victims and their families that there was a difference between what we knew happened and what could prove happened. All right, what we could prove happened. There is a giant chasm between arrest and conviction, and if you want to get from one to the other, you need legally obtained evidence. I was at home in the courtroom. I understand its rhythm. I was comfortable with its idiosyncrasies. Eventually, I moved into a unit that focused on prosecuting sex crimes, putting rapists and child molesters behind bars. It was difficult, distressing, and deeply important work. I met so many girls and sometimes boys who have been abused, assaulted, neglected, all too often by people in the relationships of trust. What made these cases especially difficult was that what was often needed to get a conviction, having the assault survivors testify. I spent a lot of those days meeting with survivors at Oakland's Highland General Hospital, walking them through what it would mean to take the stand, what that experience would be like. For some survivors, it was simply unimaginable to get on the witness stand and speak publicly about something they didn't even want to speak about privately. There is so much pain and anguish associated with having experienced sexual violence. Containing that kind of emotional trauma to take the stand requires an extraordinary amount of courage and fortitude, especially when your abuser is also in the courtroom, when that abuser may be a family member or a friend, and knowing you will be cross-examined by defense counsel whose job is to convince the jury that you aren't telling the truth. I never faulted those who couldn't bring themselves to go through with it. Often, as in the cases of the youngest children, the challenge of getting a conviction came down to the ability to testify, as much as the willingness. Those were the cases that haunted me most. I'll never forget a tiny, quiet 6-year-old girl who was being molested by her 16-year-old brother. It was my job to sit with the sweet little child and see if I could get her to tell me her story, and whether she would be able to tell it again in front of a jury. I spent a lot of time with her, playing with toys, playing games, trying to build a relationship of trust. But as much as I tried, I just knew that there was no way she could articulate to a jury what she had suffered. I remembered walking out of the room and into a bathroom where I broke down and cried. I wasn't going to have enough evidence to charge her brother. Without her testimony, I'd never be able to prove the allegations beyond a reasonable doubt. Despite all the prosecutorial power, I'm not sure I've ever felt quite so powerless. All right, he was probably white. That's very true. I didn't even think about that. But that's probably true, Nelson. Very true. Man, that's a very sad story. That's an incredibly sad story. Yeah, there's good work to be done in the prosecutor's office for some crimes, right? Especially, crimes against children, violations of people's rights. Like, you remember that white couple in what's it called, West Virginia, that kidnapped like 6 black kids and worked them like slaves a few months ago. I posted that on my channel and talked about it, right? That was a big story this year. So yeah, there's some good work prosecutors can do, but we have to think about this. Like, if you're a prosecutor going after, somebody who committed murder, right? Somebody who was dealing drugs, those sorts of crimes of passion, and also crimes where people are trying to make profit. A lot of the times in America, you're putting somebody away for 25, 30, 40 years. Like, it's insane the amount of time that we put people away behind bars, right? And you're a part of that. I can't imagine sleeping well at night knowing that somebody who did make a huge mistake is now going to be behind bars by the time I could possibly be dead, or my children could be adults. That's hard for me to imagine being a part of that. I don't want to see anybody go to jail. We need to really reform, if not outright abolish jails, how they're run right now. But yeah, continuing here. Uh, these were just some of the challenges of defending children from sexual predators. There was also the jury itself, which sometimes seemed more inclined to believe adults than children. This was especially the case when it came to sexually exploited youth. I often think of a case I had involving a 14-year-old who had run away from her foster home with a group of young men from her neighborhood. Instead of being her allies and protectors, they'd taken her to an empty apartment and gang raped her. I could tell that she had learned at a young age that she couldn't trust adults, and she wore an attitude of skepticism and hostility like a suit of armor. I felt for that poor girl and the horrific childhood that had led her to this moment, but I was also acutely aware of how the jury might perceive her as she entered the courtroom, chewing gum, potentially coming off as almost contemptuous of the process. I worried, would they see her as the child she was, as an innocent victim of serial abuse? Or would they simply write her off as someone dressed inappropriately, who had it coming? Jurors are human beings with human responses and reactions. I knew I had to meet them where they were if I was to have any chance of moving them to a more just interpretation of the facts. I could see they weren't responding to her well. They didn't seem to like her. The penal code was not created to protect some of us, I reminded the jury. It is for all of us. This girl is a child. She needs to be protected from predators who are going to pounce. And one of the reasons the defendants picked her as their victim is that they thought you wouldn't care about her enough to believe her. That's a powerful argument. In the end, we got a conviction, but I'm not sure the verdict meant much to the girl. She vanished after the trial. I asked some investigators to help me try to find her, but though we had gotten a sketchy report that she was being trafficked on the streets of San Francisco, we could never confirm it. I never saw her again. It was hard not to feel the weight of the systemic problems we were up against. Putting this young girl's abusers in prison meant they wouldn't be able to hurt other children. But what about the one they had already gotten their hands on? How had our system helped her? A conviction was never going to make her whole, nor was it enough to get her out of the cycle of violence in which she was trapped. That reality and what to do about it bounced back and forth in my head, sometimes in the back of my mind, sometimes at the front of my skull. But it would be a few years before I could tackle it head on. Okay, where's the thought about the people that you put away in jail who, even though they did something very horrible? And I'm not trying to excuse, gang raping a child or anything like that. But yeah, now these people are going to be like, what are we ever going to consider that, the registry? Are we going to ever talk about how the registry, permanently punishes people in America, where a system is put in place where we're not supposed to have cruel and unusual punishment? Are we not going to talk about how a lot of these prisons, a lot of people go to prison and literally die in there from the violence or neglect that's inflicted upon them? You get what I'm saying? Nelson Moreno says the girl who got raped ran away and became Melania Trump, or Trump's side piece. I think that's possible too. She could become Laura Loomer. In Kamala's past life as a prosecutor, she got Laura Loomer off the streets from being in San Francisco to wiggling her way up to the Mar-a-Lago food chain. All right. Anyway, I'm just saying, like, when we think about our criminal justice system, yes, people need to be prosecuted for crimes and punished for crimes, but we don't need to throw away people and bury them under the jail. That's my opinion on that, and I'm going to stand on that. Continuing here. All right. In 1998, after 9 years in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, I was recruited across the bay to the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. I was hired to run the Career Criminal Unit, which focused on violent and serial offenders. I was hesitant to go at first, and not just because I loved working in the Alameda County Courthouse. At the time, the San Francisco DA's office had a dubious reputation. I was concerned by stories of dysfunction in the office. At the same time, it was a promotion. I would be running a unit, overseeing a team of prosecutors. This was a chance to grow. Plus, my friend and mentor, Dick Eigelhart, that's a funny name. Anybody named Dick, you're always going to be funny. Even if your name is Richard, it's always going to be funny. All right. This was a chance to grow. Plus, my friend and mentor, Dick Eigelhart, who was then the chief assistant district attorney, was actively encouraging me to come. With I accepted the offer and soon found that my concern had been warranted. The office was a mess. Just one computer for every two lawyers, no filing system, no database to track cases. It was rumored that when attorneys were finished with the case, some would toss the files in the trash. This was the late 90s, and yet the office still didn't have email. There was also a huge backlog of cases that were languishing, uninvestigated, unprosecuted. Lawyers were frustrated with the police for not investigating cases. Police were frustrated with the district attorney because his office was failing to get convictions. The decisions being made at the top appeared to be arbitrary and random, and staff morale was close to rock bottom. That toxic environment was made even worse by a series of firings. One Friday, 14 lawyers came back from lunch to find pink slips on their chairs. It was devastating. People cried and yelled, and soon their fear turned into paranoia. Lawyers were afraid of one another, afraid of backstabbing by colleagues trying to protect their own jobs. Some people started skipping out on the goodbye parties of their fired compatriots, worried that their attendance would mark them as targets for firing too. All right. So Nelson Moreno says grape is very acceptable in prison and everybody is okay with it. I don't know if that's the same in Portugal, but yeah, generally it's unfortunate that, there's so many horrible things that happen to people behind prison bars, like getting raped, like getting stabbed up. It should be, the state should be held liable to the families if anybody dies behind prison bars, even if whether that be at the hands of the guards or other prisoners, right? Everybody's life is paramount for protection, even if they've committed heinous crimes, right? There needs to be more incentive to make sure that the prison system actually protects people behind bars. That's what I would say. I'm going to continue here. Some people started skipping out on the goodbye parties of their fired compatriots, worried that their attendance would mark them as targets for firing too. It was incredibly frustrating, and not just in terms of the day-to-day work. I believe the district attorney was undercutting the whole idea of what a progressive prosecutor could be. My vision of a progressive prosecutor was someone who used the power of the office with a sense of fairness, perspective, and experience. Someone who was clear about the need to hold serious criminals accountable and who understood that the best way to create safe communities was to prevent crime in the first place. To do those things effectively, you also need to run a professional operation. After 18 months, I got a lifeline. The San Francisco city attorney, Luis Wren, called me with a job offer. Luis was the first woman to hold that office. She was a groundbreaker, and she was fearless, taking on entrenched interests ranging from gun manufacturers and tobacco companies to male-only clubs. There was an opening to lead the division in her office that handled child and family services. She wanted to know if I'd be interested. I told her I would take the job, but that I didn't just want to be a lawyer dealing with individual cases. I wanted to work on policy that could improve the system as a whole. Too often, young people in foster care migrated to juvenile detention and then into the adult criminal system. I wanted to work on policies that would stem that devastating flow. Luis was all for it. So Nelson says, my brother, who is in jail, said that young boys like me are fresh meat in jail. This was when I was doing crimes exclusively against whites. This is hilarious. This is hilarious. Yeah, stay out of jail, Nelson. I don't know what's going on in those Portuguese prisons. You get what I'm saying? You're gonna be locked up in there with a bunch of Mozambicans and Angolans, and they're gonna look at your booty and they're gonna say, "We want that. We want that booty boy. Give me that booty boy." You're gonna be up there fighting Mobutu and Zimbabwe for protection of your booty in a Portuguese jail. Because I know the white supremacists in Portugal are locking up a bunch of black Brazilians, a bunch of Angolans, a bunch of Mozambicans, all sorts of stuff. We know what's going down there. Stay out of jail. Everybody stay out of jail. Don't go to jail. There's nothing good you can do to jail. Don't be like Diddy. Suicide watch, crying, thinking that, everybody's trying to poison you. You're not eating. You're crying that you want to see your kids, but you weren't thinking about that when you were putting menthol on your penis and raping women on a pool table. You weren't thinking about that when you were beating up Cassie in the hotel room, thinking that the world wouldn't see. You get what I'm saying? Don't be like Diddy. In 2024, if anything has taught us anything, don't be too jiggy. You can be so jiggy, you can go to jail. You get what I'm saying? All right, Nelson Moreno says, does she ever wonder if she got an innocent person in jail? Just she will kill many innocents in the name of the liberal order. That's a very true thing, right? There's this guy, I think his name Truelove. Jamal Truelove was a guy who was convicted of a murder that he did not commit. It's been proven that he did not commit it. And Kamala Harris tried to fight Jamal Truelove's overturn. There was no DNA evidence when the person who really did the shooting and killed somebody came out and said he did it. Right? Kamala. I don't know why I keep saying Kamala. I mean, Kamala. It's Kamala. Anyway, Kamala tried to fight Jamal Truelove from getting out of jail. And the city of San Francisco had to pay Jamal Truelove like $7 million. You get what I'm saying? Because that's good governance in America. We abuse black men and then we pay millions of dollars to their families. The best thing you can do as a black man in America is just get shot and die. Because that way, the city, state, wherever you're living, has to then pay your family untold amounts of generational wealth. That's the only thing we should do as black people in this world, because we can't travel, because people tell us if you travel somewhere, expect to be called the N-word, expect to get beat up or killed. You can't live in your own country if you live in America, the UK, France, Portugal, Spain, whatever, because then people tell you if you don't like it here, go back to Africa. You can't go to Africa because then them niggas say, give us dollars, nigga, and leave them white women with us. You cannot go anywhere in this world and be black. So the best thing to do as a black person, literally, is to either kill yourself or get killed. You get what I'm saying? Like that's how this is now you have been Simon Pilled. I'm gonna do some writing about this. I was thinking about writing about that topic when Beyonce did not get nominated for her country music album, right? And I was thinking about that deeply. I was thinking about that more deeply than I should have been. I was thinking about why Beyonce would purposely put herself in a situation knows she's going to deal with racism. And then I had to check myself. I said, damn, I sound like a racist Serbian or Albanian in my comment section. You get what I'm saying? I sound like exactly the white supremacists who tell me you deserve to be called the N-word just for traveling and being in places where you are not usually seen. So I was thinking about this. I was like, damn, Beyonce should fucking kill herself too. Because nothing Beyonce does can actually generate the type of response that she actually wants. You get what I'm saying? Even Beyonce cannot be accepted in her own lane, in her own country, in a genre that black people created. If we can't be accepted in our own damn homes, we might as well just leave this earth. We should leave this earth. All right? All right. Anyway, I'm continuing here. Rada jumped into the comments. Shout out to Rada. All right. But yeah, innocent people have been put in jail by Kamala Harris. Definitely. An innocent man was just killed in America yesterday. I believe the state of Missouri executed a man named Marcellus Wiley, a man whose DNA was not found at the crime. Another person admitted to committing the crime. And still in America, an innocent black man was murdered yesterday. Y'all remember that famous picture of the communists in New York City out of their office? They had a flag outside and it said a man was lynched yesterday. We should put that up. I should post that on my community tab. From Marcellus Wiley, rest in peace. I don't know if that's Marcellus Wiley or if I'm talking about the football player Marcellus Wiley, but the guy's name was Marcellus, that's for sure. Anyway, a man was lynched yesterday in America. Our criminal justice system is corrupt. Beyonce should kill herself, and you should probably get shot by the police. That was the whole purpose of that rant right there. Anyway, continuing here. Rada, I heard about Marcellus. I don't know much about it other than he died, right? Well, he was killed by the state. An innocent man yesterday was killed in America because we have the best and fairest criminal justice system in America because they do a service to black people. They do a service to black people by killing us, which is what we should do. All right, I'm continuing here. I spent 2 years at the city attorney's office. I started by co-founding a task force to study the issues of sexually exploited youth. We put together a group of experts, survivors, and community members to help guide the work. A series of recommendations we would present to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Norma Hoteling was my partner in that office. She had firsthand experience with the challenges we were tackling. She had been abused as a girl and ended up homeless and addicted to heroin. She was arrested for prostitution more than 30 times, but hers was one of the few such stories that have a happy ending. Norma got clean. She went to college. She got a degree in health education. And as soon as she graduated, she put that degree to use, creating a program designed to rescue women from prostitution that is widely replicated today. I couldn't think of a better person to have teamed up with, and I admire her for having the courage to tell her story and put it to use for the benefit of so many others. One of the priorities creating a safe place for prostituted youth to get love and support and treatment. I knew from years of experience that the survivors we were trying to help usually had nowhere to go. In most cases, their parents weren't in the picture. Many of them had run away from foster care. People often wondered why it was that exploited kids picked up by the police would go right back to the pimps or older prostitutes who took care of them. It didn't seem so strange to me. Where else were these kids able to turn? It's obvious Kamala did not see Taxi Driver. And I'm glad she didn't too. I'm glad Kamala did it. You know what? I wish Kamala did see Taxi Driver so that she could probably focus her aim on prosecuting deranged white men. Anyway, continuing here. Our task force proposed establishing a safe house for sexually exploited youth, a sanctuary that would offer substance abuse and mental health treatment, the resources needed to get back to school, and a network of support to keep vulnerable young people safe, healthy, and on track. We advocated for funding to create the safe house as well as to run a public education campaign. We put posters up in public bathrooms and on buses where at-risk youth will be able to get the information they needed without their pimp hovering over them. We also believed it was important to disrupt the network of brothels masquerading as massage parlors, where so many people were being sexually exploited. So we asked the Board of Supervisors to direct law enforcement to investigate them as one of their top priorities. I have to ask, has anybody ever been to them Thai massage places? Anybody ever been to them places with the Chinese letters and the red coloring on the awning outside? And the images of like hot stones on a white man's back. Has anybody ever been in one of them joints? I never have. I never have, but they're everywhere out here in Budapest. And when I think back in my life, there was a bunch in Monroe, Louisiana too. There was a bunch all over the place. I was never into that, but I was actually perusing the internets like I'd be lurking in the streets, and people were talking about their experiences in them parlors. And they were saying like basically it's broad daylight prostitution. Broad daylight prostitution. You lay down, you get flipped over by the little Asian lady. Sometimes the little Asian ladies be homely. They be a little older. They be on the older side, but they be doing the little ancient Chinese secrets to get the pee hard, right? And then they advertise. They don't say, happy ending, like how you be hearing in movies and stuff like that. But it's so crazy that sort of like culture is so understood, that it's so widespread. You get what I'm saying? Because I'm pretty sure it's going down here in Budapest too. Pretty sure it's going down in every country across the world. And that sort of trafficking is just okay. Okay, Nelson says he went to one, but it was Brazilian owned in Portugal. Now, Brazilian one actually sounds fire, low key, but it's not something that you should do because you don't know where those girls are coming from. Those girls could be trafficked. Those girls could be, they could be a part of that underground ring. You get what I'm saying? You don't want to be involved in the ring because you don't want to be in the ring when the sting happens. You get what I'm saying? So it's so crazy. Like Diddy is getting arrested for being too jiggy, having the freak offs. Meanwhile, in DC, New York, LA, San Francisco, Miami, New Orleans, everywhere, there's like legal prostitution. Whereas there's like a 17-year-old Thai girl right now giving a blowjob to like a 50-year-old white man for $200, right? With hot stones on his stomach. They got all that baby oil out of Diddy's garage, but that baby oil was probably headed to like a massage parlor. That's crazy. Anyway, wow, Nelson says it's 50 euros per massage. That's insane. That's insane. But I would not trust my dick near anything that was only $50. I would not trust my dick. I would not put my dick in a pair of underwear. I would not, if you told me to put my dick in this hole for $50, I wouldn't do it. That's crazy. You got to be a wild boy to be getting topped off for 50 euros. You're a wild boy. I'm continuing here. Anyway. To our delight, the Board of Supervisors adopted and funded our recommendations. We were able to rescue scores of runaways within the first couple of years. Law enforcement, meanwhile, shut down nearly 36 brothels in the city. The work was meaningful, empowering, and proof that I could do serious policy work without being a legislator. It also boosted my confidence that when I saw problems, I could be the one to help devise the solutions. All those times my mother had pressed me, well, what did you do? Suddenly made a lot more sense. I realized I didn't have to wait for someone else to take the lead. I could start making things happen on my own. I think it was that realization that turned my sights to elected office. Of all the problems I saw in front of me, few were more few were in more urgent need of fixing than the district attorney's office. While we were making important gains at the city attorney's office, the district attorney's office was self-destructing. Talented career prosecutors were seeing their efforts undervalued and feeling stymied in the vital work to which they devoted their lives. Meanwhile, violent felons were walking free. I knew this. We all knew this. But suddenly, it was just an important problem to be solved. It was an important problem I could solve. I wanted to honor, support, and empower the DA's office as a whole. But in order to run the office, I would have to run for office. A political campaign would be a huge undertaking and one I clearly couldn't embark upon lightly. I turned to my friends, my family, my colleagues, my mentors. We had long animated debates, another thesis to defend. We weighed the pros and cons, and then we weighed them all again. People were generally supportive of the idea, but they were worried too. My would-be opponent and former boss was already a household name. He also had a reputation as a fighter. In fact, his nickname was Kaio, as in KO. A tribute to the many knockouts he scored in his boxing youth. A campaign would be not only bruising, but also expensive, and I had no experience as a fundraiser. Was this really the time for me to run? I had no way of knowing, but more and more, I was coming to feel that wait and see wasn't an option. I thought of James Baldwin, whose words had defined so much of the civil rights struggle. There is never a time in the future in which we will work out our salvation, he'd written. The challenge is in the moment. The time is always now. Shout out to James Baldwin. All right. So those trafficked white tears only made me hard. Something about a woman crying. Something about a woman crying seems to just make a lot of men just, it seems, because I can share the feeling. I can share that feeling. But that's hilarious. That's hilarious. Seeing a pseudo-European Brazilian, you get what I'm saying? She's like 75% white, trafficked in like Lisbon in the back of like a parlor. As tragic as that may be, for the young Mozambican man getting his dick sucked for the first time by some like girl who believed so much in her racial purity all her life in racist ass Brazil, ending up in Lisbon, getting piped down by an Angolan brother. It's cosmic karma to the umpteenth degree. We love it. But no. Sex trafficking is not cool. Prostitution is not cool. Don't go to them parlors. Do not go to them parlors. That's how COVID started. That's how we're going to get monkeypox in Europe. Like, we're going to get monkeypox in Europe. Case zero is going to be like in Amsterdam at some $50 joint. You get what I'm saying? That's not cool. Let's not bring mpox to Europe. Continuing here. Chapter 2, A Voice for Justice. Kamala, let's go. Come on, we're going to be late. My mother was losing patience. Just a second, mommy, I called back. Yes, my mother was and always will be mommy to me. We were on our way to campaign headquarters where volunteers were gathering. My mother often took charge of the volunteer operation, and she didn't dilly-dally. Everyone knew that when Shyamala spoke, you listened. We drove from my apartment near Market Street, past the wealth and attractions of San Francisco's downtown, to a predominantly Black neighborhood in the southeast part of town known as Bayview, Hunters Point. The Bayview had been home to the Hunters Point Naval Shipyard, which helped to build America's fighting fleet in the mid-20th century. In the 1940s, the prospect of good jobs and affordable housing around the shipyard lured thousands of Black Americans who were seeking opportunity and relief from the pain and injustice of segregation. These workers bent the steel and welded the plates that helped our nation win the Second World War. I think Hunters Point is also where OJ was from. Y'all correct me if I'm wrong. I think OJ, rest in peace, was from Hunters Point, Bayview. Anyway, but like too many similar neighborhoods in America, the Bayview had been left behind in the post-war. When the shipyard closed, nothing came to take its place. Beautiful old houses were boarded up. Toxic waste polluted the soil, water, and air. Drugs and violence poisoned the streets. And poverty of the worst kind settled in, presented in the criminal justice system, and also plagued by unsolved crimes. Families in the Bayview, many of which had generational roots in San Francisco, were cut off, literally and figuratively, from the promise of the thriving city they called home. The Bayview was the kind of place that no one in the city ever saw unless they made it their business to go there. You didn't pass it on the freeway. You didn't cross it to get from one part of the city to another. It was, in deeply tragic ways, invisible to the world beyond it. I wanted to be part of changing that. So I headquartered my campaign at 3rd Avenue and Galvez, right in the heart of the Bayview. All right. Nelson Moreno says, after dating white women, I understand OJ. Listen, man, listen. Don't kill your wives. Don't kill your white girlfriends. You get what I'm saying? But I could understand that OJ got more than a few times upset that the season wasn't chickened, that only black pepper was allowed in the house, no spices. You get what I'm saying? Hairs all over the pillows. I could understand. I could understand. R.I.P. OJ. We understand. R.I.P. OJ. He didn't kill Nicole, by the way. He didn't kill Nicole. He is innocent. He is innocent as George Zimmerman. I repeat, O.J. Simpson is innocent. He did not kill anybody. Whoever killed Nicole needs to be brought to justice. You get what I'm saying? But he did abuse Nicole. He was Diddy outside. He was Diddy. O.J. was Diddy to some degree. You get what I'm saying? But he didn't kill Nicole. Didn't do it. If he didn't do it, if he did it, Zimmerman did it. The white supremacists ain't gonna say that. All right, continuing here. The political consultants thought I was nuts. They had no campaign volunteers would ever come to the Bayview from other parts of the city. But it was places like the Bayview that had inspired me to run in the first place. I wasn't running so I could have a fancy office downtown. I was running for the chance to represent people whose voices weren't being heard and to bring the promise of public safety to every neighborhood, not just some. Besides, I didn't believe that people wouldn't come to the Bayview. And I was right. They did come by the dozens. San Francisco, like our country as a whole, is diverse yet deeply segregated, more mosaic than melting pot. Yet our campaign attracted people representing the full vibrancy of the whole community. Volunteers and supporters poured in from Chinatown, the Castro, Pacific Heights, the Mission District, white, black, Asian, and Latinx, wealthy and working class, male and female, old and young, gay and straight. A couple of teenage graffiti artists decorated the back wall of campaign headquarters, spray painting justice in giant letters. HQ buzzed with volunteers, some calling voters, some sitting together around a table, stuffing envelopes, others picking up clipboards so they could go door to door talking to people in the community about what we were trying to do. We pulled up to the headquarters just in time. I let my mother out. You have the ironing board, she asked. Yeah, of course. It's in the back seat. Okay, I love you, she said as she shut the car door. As I drove away, I could hear her call, Kamala, what about the duct tape? I had the duct tape. I got back on the road and drove toward the nearest supermarket. It was a Saturday morning, the equivalent of rush hour in the grocery aisles. I pulled up into the parking lot, snuck my car into one of the few open spots, and grabbed the ironing board, the tape, and a campaign sign that looked slightly worn from being tossed in and out of the car. If you think running for office sounds glamorous, I wish you could have seen me striding through the parking lot with the ironing board under my arm. I remember the kids who would look curiously at the ironing board and the moms who would hustle them past. I couldn't blame them. I must have looked out of place, if not totally out of my mind. But an ironing board makes for the perfect standing desk. I set it up in front of the supermarket entrance, just off to the side, near the carts, and taped up a sign that read, Kamala Harris, a voice for justice, when the campaign was just getting started. My friend, Andrea Du Steele, and I had put together my first piece of campaign literature, a basic one-page in black and white bio and summary of my positions. Andrea would later found Emerge America, an organization that recruits and trains Democratic women to run for elected office nationwide. I put several stacks of my flyer on the ironing board, and next to it, a clipboard with a sign-up sheet. Then I got to work. Hold on, wait. By the way, I got to say this. If she's running for office, this has to be around 2000, something like that. Right, early 2000s or the late 90s. I forgot exactly the time, but either way, she skipped over Willie Brown. I have not seen Willie Brown's name mentioned once. Right now, if you're telling your memoir, right, and it's especially, you're a very high profile public person, right, you might not want to put all your relationship business out there like that, right? She's married now, she got kids, you get what I'm saying? She might not want to put out that, in between her rising in her career as a clerk of the court, junior prosecutor, whatever, right? She was getting piped down by Willie Brown, the mayor of San Francisco, right? She might not want to mention that, right? She got her husband's reading it, and her kids are reading it. But I feel like this shows like the disingenuousness of this book and also the dishonesty of politicians in general, right? Like, by and large, this book is much better than Trump's book, right? It's a much more inspiring story. It's a much more believable story. It's a much more human story than Trump's wild meanderings in his book, Crippled America, that we read, right? But I got to say this. I feel like if you're going to be talking about, your life, especially how you got started in law, you should also be talking about, your relationship with Willie, um, you know, that how that was a big part of your story, right? Because I'm not that type of guy to say like Kamala slept her way to the top. Willie Brown is how she, came up. That's not my position at all. But I just feel like that's a necessary part of the story. Like I could not write a book about my life and just skip over my first wife, right? I could not write a book about my life and not talk about the time, when I lost my virginity. It's a funny story, right? And it's also an important story when I think about my life and contextualize things too. You get what I'm saying? But I couldn't talk about my life not just through the lens of my relationships and who I was with and how I got down or anything like that. But I would say it's important and it's real. You get what I'm saying? It your relationships you have with people, romantic or otherwise, are important. That's why she's naming so many people in this book who were instrumental in her development and her choices. But just skipping over Willie like that, I feel like that's hella disrespectful. Hella disrespectful to me. You get what I'm saying? Nelson Moreno says white supremacist police department did it, or at least they were the real villain. He's talking about who really killed Nicole. It could have been anything. It could have been drug dealers from Colombia. I've heard that theory. It could be the police, because there was a racist policeman who was trying to, prosecute OJ, Rob Furman. I think his name Rob Furman or Mark Furman. The OJ case was before my trial. But anyway, they found out one of the police officers in the Los Angeles Police Department was a literal Nazi, was caught on audio talking about how he is so racist. He is so racist. He hates the N-word so much. He wants to quit the police force. That's how racist he was. And the police said, no, please stay. The Los Angeles Police Department got an audio of police officer Furman saying, I am so racist. Please transfer me. I am not safe to be around black people. You know how crazy that sounds? And then the police department said, no, Rob, you can keep working the beat. That's crazy. So, yeah, I think it's very possible that the racist ass Los Angeles Police Department killed Nicole to bring down this black man who was living his high life with his blonde hair, blue eyed wife in the Malibu Hills or whatever. Yeah, that makes sense, especially. Continuing here. Nelson Moreno, I wonder if she was into black guys in the beginning, like a BBC phase. I'm pretty sure, Kamala, I think, I feel like, in my opinion, it's only been very recently. Where the social taboo of black women dating white men has happened, right? I think it's very possible that all of Kamala's guys up to a certain point in recent time, when she met Doug, I think she married Doug in mid 2000s, early 2010, sometime around then, right? Who knows? They could have been dating for longer. And the Bay Area in California is different, but I feel like that taboo has only recently been broken down, right? So yeah, I think it's very likely Kamala was only dating black men at the very beginning of her career and life. You know what I mean? But I don't know. Y'all let me know. Is it sexist to be speculating on a woman's, relationship history when she's talking about her rise in her career? You get what I'm saying? Because I feel like, it is if she was only talking about her career. But this is the memoir of her life. I think those are two qualitatively different things. You get what I'm saying? You're writing the memoir of your life. I think it's important to talk about, those people you dated, especially if they were public figures too. All right. Anyway, continuing here. Shoppers rolled their car the automatic doors, squinting at the sunlight, trying to remember where they parked the car, and then out of left field, "Hi, I'm Kamala Harris. I'm running for district attorney, and I hope to have your support." In truth, I would have settled for them just remembering my name. Early on in the campaign, we did a poll to see how many people in the county of San Francisco had heard of me. The answer was a whopping 6%, as in 6 of every 100 people had heard of me before. I couldn't help but wonder, was my mother one of the people they'd randomly called? But I hadn't gotten into this thinking it would be easy. I knew I'd have to work hard to introduce myself and what I stood for to a whole lot of people who had no idea who I was. For some first-time candidates, interacting with strangers can feel awkward, and understandably so. It isn't easy to initiate a conversation with someone who passes you on the street, or to try to connect with them at the bus stop on their way home after work, or to walk into a merchant's business and try to strike up a conversation with the owner. I got my share of polite and occasionally not so polite rebuffs, like a telemarketer calling during dinner But more often than not, I encountered people who were welcoming, open, and eager to talk about the issues affecting their daily lives and their hopes for their family and their community, whether that meant cracking down on domestic violence or creating better options for at risk kids. Years later, I still run into people who remember our interactions at those bus stops. It may sound strange, but the thing it reminded me of most was jury selection. When I worked as a prosecutor, I spent a lot of time in the courtroom talking to people who'd been called for jury duty from every part of the community. My job was to ask them questions over the course of a few minutes, and based on that, try to figure out their priorities and perspectives. Campaigning was kind of like that, but without opposing counsel trying to cut me off. I loved being able to engage. Sometimes a mom would come out of the grocery store with a toddler in the shopping cart seat, and we find ourselves spending a good 20 minutes talking about her life and her struggles and her daughter's Halloween costume. Before we parted, I'd look her in the eye and say, I hope I can have your support. It's amazing how often people would tell me that no one had ever asked them that directly before. Still, this process didn't come naturally to me. I was always more than happy to talk about the work to be done, but voters wanted to hear about more than just policy. They wanted to know about me personally, who I was and what my life had been like, the experiences that had shaped me. They wanted to understand who I was on a fundamental level, but I'd been raised not to talk about myself. I've been raised with the belief that there was something narcissistic about doing so, something vain. And so even though I understood that it was motivating their questions, it took some time before I got used to it. There were multiple candidates in my first DA, and a runoff was inevitable. But our polling, which had markedly improved over time, suggested that if we just made the runoff, we could win 5 weeks later. I spent election day on the streets shaking hands from the pre-dawn commutes until the polls closed. Chris Sett, one of my closest friends, flew in to help with the last minute campaigning. It felt like the final quarter mile sprint at the end of a marathon, thrilling in its own way. My family, friends, senior campaign staff members, and I went out to dinner as the results started rolling in. My campaign manager, Jim Stearns, was at the elections office watching the count and calling the numbers. Over the course of the meal, my dear friend Mark Lino, who was then a member of the California State Assembly, kept track of the counts along with Maya, my campaign consultant Jim Rivaldo, and my friend Matthew Rothschild. With each precinct that reported and between bites of pasta, they would update the tally on the paper tablecloth. Modern campaigns rely on big data, analytics, and sophisticated voter turnout models. But in my experience, I found that a friend, a pen, and a bowl of spaghetti are just as effective. We were getting ready to leave when Maya grabbed my arm. A new update had come in. Oh my God, you did it, she exclaimed. You made the runoff. I did the math myself to make sure she was right. I remembered looking at Maya and Maya looking at me, and both of us saying, can you believe it? We're really in this. The runoff was held 5 weeks later. It rained that day, and I spent it getting soaked as I shook hands with voters at bus stops. That night, as I'd hoped, we won a decisive victory. We held a party at campaign headquarters, and I walked out to speak as "We Are the Champions" blasted through the room. Looking out at the crowd, friends, family, mentors, volunteers from the campaign, I saw one community. There were people from the poorest neighborhoods and the richest, police officers alongside advocates fighting for police reform, young people cheering with senior citizens. It was a reflection of what I've always believed to be true. When it comes to the things that matter most, we have so much more in common than what separates us. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Congratulations to her. Big deal. But yeah, continuing here. At the time of this writing, it's been almost 15 years since my inauguration as district attorney. I have spent almost every day since working in some way or another on reforming the criminal justice system. I spent 2 terms in its pursuit as district attorney and nearly 2 terms as attorney general, and I introduced criminal justice reform legislation within my first 6 weeks as a United States senator. Though I understood fully that inauguration morning in 2004, how important the issues were to me, I never could have imagined that they would lead me from San Francisco to Sacramento to Washington, D.C. My inauguration ceremony for district attorney took place in the Herbst Theater in the San Francisco War Memorial and Performing Arts Center, the same stage where the United Nations Charter had been signed in 1945. Now we were making a different kind of history, but unity was still the message of the day. My mother stood between me and Ronald George, the Republican Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court, who I chose to swear me in. My strongest memory is of looking at her and seeing the pure pride on her face. The room was packed to overflowing. Hundreds of people from all corners of the city. Drummers drummed, a youth choir sang. One of my pastors gave a beautiful invocation Chinese dragon dancers roamed the aisles. The San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus serenaded us all. It was multicultural, multiracial, a little frenzied in all the best and most beautiful ways. Jerry Brown, then mayor of Oakland, was sitting in the front row. He told me that his father had taken the same oath of office 60 years ago to the day. And with Gavin Newsom swearing in as mayor the same day as mine, there was a palpable sense in the city that a new chapter was opening for San Francisco politics and what might be possible for us all. I made my way through the crowd, shaking hands and getting hugs and taking in the joy of it all. As the festivities were winding down, a man came up to me with his two young daughters. I brought them here today, he said, so they could see what someone who looked like them could grow up to do. After the inauguration, I snuck away from my new office. I wanted to know what it felt like to sit in the chair. My communications director, Debbie Meslow, and I drove to the Hall of Justice. Standing right next to the freeway 850, as it was known, for 850 Bryant Street, was a gray, solemn, and imposing building. I used to joke that it was a horribly wonderful place to work. In addition to the district attorney's office, the building housed the police department, the criminal courts, the city tow office, the county jail, and the city coroner's office. There was no doubt that this was a place where people's lives were changed, sometimes forever. Oh, wow, I surveyed my, or more accurately, I looked around the empty room. It had been stripped of almost everything as part of the transition. A metal cabinet sat against one wall with the 1980s Wayne computer on top of it. Mind you, it was 2004. No wonder the office hadn't gotten email yet. A plastic-lined wastebasket stood in the corner of a few loose wires stuck out of the floor. Out of the window of my new office, I could see a row of bail bonds businesses, a daily reminder of the ways in which the criminal justice system is more punishing to the poor. There was no desk in the office, just a chair where the desk had been, but that was okay. It was a chair I had come for. I took my seat. Now it was quiet, and for the first time since the day began, I was alone with my thoughts, taking it all in, contemplating the surreal. That's so crazy. Low key, the person that had the office before her was like, we're going to take everything out of the office because we don't want this black woman to steal anything. So they just like stripped everything. You know what I'm saying? That's what it feels like. I don't know. I'm going to continue here. Now it was quiet, and for the first time since the day began, I was alone with my thoughts, taking it all in, contemplating the surreal. I had run because I knew I could do the than it had been done. Still, I knew I represented experience. At the time, there weren't many district attorneys me or had my background. There still aren't. A report in 2015 found that 95% of our country's elected prosecutors were white and 79% were white men. No part of me would more fully inform my perspective than the decade I had spent on the front lines of the criminal justice system as a line prosecutor. I knew it was backward and forward. I knew it backward and forward. For what it was, for what it wasn't, and for what it could be. The courthouse was supposed to be the epicenter of justice, but what it was often a great epicenter of injustice. I knew both to be true. I had been around the courtroom long enough to see victims of violence show up years later as perpetrators of violence. I worked with children who had grown up in neighborhoods so crime-ridden that they had rates of PTSD as high as those growing up in war zones. I had worked with kids in foster care who changed homes 6 times before turning 18. I had seen them run away from one bad circumstance to another, only to get caught into the gears of the system with no prospect for breaking free. I had seen children march for a bleak future solely because of the circumstances of their birth and the zip codes in which they lived. As deputy DA, my job had been to hold violators of the law accountable. Didn't the system owe them and their communities some accountability too? What the system doled out instead was an era of mass incarceration that has further devastated already disadvantaged communities. The United States put more people in prison than any country in the world. All told, we hold more than 2.1 million people locked up in state and federal prisons in 2018. To put that in perspective, there are 15 American states that have smaller populations than that. The war on drugs pulled a lot of people into the system. It turned the criminal justice system into an assembly line. I saw it up close. All right, let's see. let's say this will be the last page that we're going to read right here. And before I leave, I'm going to say shout out to Nelson Moreno, shout out to Rada, shout out to anybody watching and listening. This has been an interesting book so far. We're going to try to blow through this book. I want to get this done like possibly this week, next week. I got so many things on my plate. It's hard to manage them all. I just got to not sleep. I just have to do one full day of 24-hour grind set to get everything done. You get what I'm saying? But let's knock this page out, and I'll catch y'all on the next time. So this gives y'all a chance to put any questions you have in the comment section and holler at me. So early in my career, I was assigned to a part of the Alameda County DA's office known as the Bridge, where lawyers in small offices would handle drug cases by the hundreds. There were bad actors in the piles, to be sure, plenty of dealers selling to kids or forcing kids to sell for them, but too many case files told a different story. A man arrested for simple possession of a few rocks of crack, a woman arrested for being under the influence while sitting on her stoop. The cases were as easy to prove as they were tragic to charge. In the rush to clean up the streets, we were criminalizing a public health crisis, and without a focus on treatment and prevention. The crack epidemic spread like a deadly virus, burning through city after city until it had stolen a generation of people. As I sat alone in my new office, I recalled a time as a young prosecutor when I overheard some of my colleagues in the hallway. Should we add the gang enhancement? One of them asked. Can we show he was in a gang? The other said. Come on, you saw what he was wearing. You saw which corner they picked him up on. Guys got the tape of that rapper. What's his name? Guys got the tape of that rapper. What's his name? I stepped out into the hallway. Hey, guys, just so you know, I have a family that live in that neighborhood. I've got friends who dress in that style, and I've got a tape of that rapper in my car right now. I reflected on it all, about why I ran for office, whom I had come there to help, and the difference between getting convictions and having conviction. Getting convictions and having conviction. In the end, I knew I was there for the victims, both the victims of crime committed and the victims of a broken criminal justice system. And for me to be a progressive prosecutor is to understand and act on this dichotomy. It is to understand that when a person takes another's life, or a child is molested, or a woman raped, the perpetrators deserve severe consequences. That is one imperative of justice. But it is also to understand that fairness is in short supply in the justice system that is supposed to guarantee it. The job of a progressive prosecutor is to look out for the overlooked, to speak up for those whose voices aren't being heard, to see and address the causes of crime, not just their consequences, and to shine a light on the inequality and unfairness that lead to injustice. It is to recognize that everyone needs punishment, that what many need, quite plainly, is help. Okay. While being a progressive prosecutor, I would like to see what actually she did. In her career, hopefully she'll talk about that more. I think being a progressive prosecutor is much more than saying, hey, I listen to E42, so don't prosecute or, characterize people as criminals just because they listen to E40, right? It's crazy because that she might be defending this person, that they're profiling in the prosecutor's office, but then at the same time, she's going to stand up in court and say, Kamala, for the people, we want this. Honor, we recommend the convicted felon now get 50 years behind bars for his crime, right? Like, progressive prosecutor sounds like an oxymoron to me to some degree, but we'll talk about this more. Shout out to Nelson, shout out to Raider, shout out to everybody that jumped into the chat. We're going to continue on in this book in our next live stream. The next live stream. We'll start here. There was a knock at the door. It was Debbie. You ready? She asked, smiling. I'll be there in a second, I told her. I breathed in the silence for another moment. Then I pulled a pen and yellow notepad from my briefcase and started to make a list. All right. So we'll start here in our next live stream next time. Y'all be easy out there. My name's Simon Hill. I'm keeping it real. Y'all be easy. Peace.